Can the Seattle Seahawks get something good out of their safety room this year after an off-season reboot? What's going on, everybody? Good morning. Welcome back. We've got a few more of these prediction videos to do. We are getting near the end here. In fact, in terms of just going positionally, we are basically at the end. We are at the final line of the defense. We are at the very back end here. So we have basically run through every player on this team that is likely to be in any way relevant to the 2024 season. So we're finishing up with safety, which is a very interesting position for the Seahawks this year. Over the last few years, the Seahawks have been among the most invested team in the league at the safety position. They have put draft picks and they have put money into that position like no other team. The Jamal Adams trade and contract, the Quandre Diggs, we'll call it a contract because the trade was relatively cheap, but they went heavy at the safety position. And I think history has borne out that that decision was a mistake, and it's a big reason why Pete Carroll lost his job. It didn't work. It was a gamble. It was going against the grain of most of the NFL right now, and it was a mess, with the Seahawks defense ranking 25th in the league 2 straight seasons. So now this year, no more Quandre Diggs, no more Jamal Adams. They're both still out in free agency, waiting to get picked up by somebody. Maybe nobody will. And the Seahawks are still paying them a good amount of money. But in the meantime, they've got to replace them on the field with other players. And they've decided to go, well, for one, they're sticking with some of the pieces they already had from last year. But they are also going out and getting cheaper short-term options. So the question is, obviously, we are now cheaper and lower profile at the position, but can we get good things out of the players that we have? Can we get good bang for our buck from this collection of safeties? So we're going to go through here. We're going to take a look at some of my predictions for each player. Now, obviously, when it comes to safeties, statistical predictions only go so far. There's going to be some more important stuff with whether or not these guys are successful, but we're going to start here. All right, so before we get into the numbers here, I ask that you please like the video if you haven't already. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and click the bell if you want notifications. Consider becoming a channel member for $2 a month, less than 10 cents a day. Let's go ahead and get underway here, starting with Julian Love. Julian Love was here last year, had an inconsistent first year in Seattle. He gave up a ton in coverage. He was among the most picked on safeties in all of the NFL. But he also made plays on the ball, had some really good games, had some really good moments, was overall a pretty decent player as near as I can tell. And there's reason to believe he'll do very well in this new defense because he's a versatile player. That's what stood out about him in the Wink Martindale defense over in New York. Now he gets to hook up with Mike Macdonald, who should have a little bit of an understanding of how to utilize his skill set. So, Julian Love, tackles, I ended up going with 101. 101, I think Love's going to be a little all over the place. He's going to be doing some box stuff. He's going to be doing some deep stuff. He's going to be doing some slot corner stuff. You might even see him line up as an outside corner once or twice. So there are going to be plenty of opportunities for him to be around the ball. When he's in the box, you're going to be around the ball. When you're in the slot, you're going to be around the ball regardless of what happens pretty much. So I'm going to say 101. With a safety, I think it's pretty reasonable to expect him to play a full season or very close to it. So I think it's reasonable to expect him to play 17 games, and 101 tackles over 17 games would be in line with what I think you typically get from a defense where you don't have some amazing bulletproof front seven, which I don't think we're going to have yet. Tackles for loss, I didn't go with a lot here. This is admittedly where it gets hard because we don't know exactly how Macdonald is going to use his safeties. And he might want to do certain things with his safeties, but he feels like he can't do it as much as he wants to because he doesn't have the right players yet. Like Julian Love is a guy he inherited. Now, I do think that Love's skill set fits in pretty well, but For all we know, he's going to be relatively passive and play it safe with Julian Love because he doesn't see him as being a blue chip talent like, for instance, Kyle Hamilton, who we had over in Baltimore. So I just went with 3. I do think he's going to get plenty of opportunities to take the ball away, though, so I went with 4 interceptions, which is actually what he had last year. I imagine that he's going to be better in coverage this year, but I also think that he'll get picked on a lot because it's better to throw his way than it is to throw at a guy like a Witherspoon or a Woolen in all likelihood. So he'll get targeted a lot, but he'll also have plenty of picks to go with it. And I went with 12 passes defensed. Again, if you're going to get picked on a little bit, the way I suspect Love will be, then I think that you're going to end up making plays on the ball just because of the volume of balls that come your way. 2 quarterback pressures, and I'm not going to go crazy here. I do think that there's some stuff McDonald wants to do. He's not necessarily going to do it with Julian Love quite yet. And as for some coverage numbers, I do think he's still going to give up a lot. It's not going to be quite like last year, but I went with 549. Again, when you can't really attack our corners that well because our cornerback room is so good, you're going to have to go after other players, and Love is going to be one of those guys. If he comes up in slot, then he's a guy that quarterbacks are going to look at and go, yeah, that's my guy. That's the mark. As a safety, he might be the mark as well. Better than the other options. And touchdowns allowed, I went with 4. So he'll be fine. He'll be good enough. But I don't think we're going to be looking to give him some fat extension going into the offseason. All right, other safety will be Rayan Jenkins, a guy we brought in from Jacksonville. He was released this most recent offseason. Pretty good player. Not really a long-term solution here, but he could be a decent stopgap for the time being. Rayan Jenkins, I went with 93 tackles. Should be less than Julian Love because I think Jenkins is going to be a little more free safety. I do think there is going to be some ubiquity within the... or I may have said that wrong. The safeties in this defense should be somewhat ubiquitous, but I think Rayshawn's going to be a little bit more of a last line of defense guy rather than a guy who plays up in the box. And then I went with 5 tackles for loss as well. If you look at what he did in Jacksonville, he did actually make a decent number of plays in the backfield. Gap shooting seems to be a little bit more in his wheelhouse, so I went with 5. And I'm going to go with the 2 interceptions. He's never been a huge interception guy. And I just feel like Love's going to get a little bit more. Of the safeties on this team, I think Love takes the ball away a little bit more. I'm going to go with 8 passes defensed as well. I'm going to need a look at what Rayshawn is doing here to get an idea if he's going to be a guy who gets picked on. Because there are guys that we've had here in Seattle at the free safety spot, most notably Earl Thomas, who don't put up big coverage numbers because they don't get targeted that much. I'm wondering if Rayshawn can be like that. Diggs was like that for a while as well. So we'll see about Rayshawn. I kind of want to see it before I commit to anything, but I'll just put these numbers out there. Also going to go with 4 QB pressures. Rayshawn was used on the blitz a pretty decent amount in Jacksonville. I think we will continue to do that. It is part of his skill set. I went with 411 yards. Generally speaking, I think Rayshawn will get targeted less than Julian Love because he'll be protecting deep down the field a little bit more, but the completions he does give up will be bigger because of the role that he's occupying. And touchdowns, I went with 2. I want to stress, this is really hard right now because we don't really know how these players are going to get used, and I think it's a little bit early. Sorry if you could hear something fell over there. Until we see it, we're not going to know. We can speculate based off what happened in Baltimore, but as of right now, I don't think we can possibly know. So those are your 2 starting safeties. I think they're both going to be okay. Kayvon Wallace, probably the first safety off the bench. We signed him, 1-year deal, very cheap. He's been a decent player in the league in previous stops. He was a good player last year across a couple different teams. Not a great player at all. Not somebody who was going to get a starting job this offseason off the bat, and as we can see, he didn't. We might do some 3 safety stuff, but I don't necessarily know if Kayvon Wallace will be that 3rd safety. We might end up using some of our corners in that capacity. Like, what if Witherspoon plays safety every now and then for 3 safety looks? That might be better than putting Wallace out there. I don't know. But Wallace will probably get out there a little bit because of injury, because of situational stuff. So I'm going to give him 30 tackles. I think that's pretty reasonable. Maybe he starts 1 or 2 games and piles up numbers in those 2 games and then is otherwise pretty quiet. I'll go with 1 tackle for loss. I don't view him as a splash player. I don't view him as a guy who's going to be gunning into the backfield and doing a lot of things back there. Also, no interceptions. For a guy who I don't think is going to play that much, interceptions are kind of a luck-based thing. Either a ball goes your way or it doesn't, so I'm just going to go with 0. I will go with 1 pass defensed, however, and I'll go with 1 pressure as well, right? Why not? Just at some point this year, he gets sent on the blitz and manages to disrupt the quarterback. Allows 93 yards in coverage and no touchdowns. I just feel like he's going to go in there at some point this season, be it garbage time or stepping up for a guy who gets hurt, and he'll just be kind of he'll be playing against the run for the most part. That's going to be the main thing that stands out about him. Just not much. Next safety after that is probably Kobe Bryant, and I don't know exactly what the plan is for Kobe Bryant. He could be playing corner, he could be playing slot again, he could be playing safety. But as of right now, I think his best bet to actually playing a little bit this year is safety. And then he's there for emergencies at corner if you really need it. But I went with 26 tackles. Not going to be anything huge over the top here. But I do think he sees the field a little bit in the secondary in some capacity. And when he's been out there, he's been involved. It's not been great, but he's been involved. He's been around the ball, and he does some good things. No tackles for loss. I will go with 1 interception. He comes up with 1. He needs 1. Keeps getting hosed by the referees. He needs to actually come up with a legitimate interception at some point. And 1 pass defensed. And I went with 0 pressures and 67 yards allowed in coverage and 0 touchdowns. I don't think he'll play enough to go beyond that. I don't necessarily think he'll be like some great player in coverage. Don't get it twisted. These numbers don't mean that. But in terms of how much playing time he'll get, I think that's about expected. All right, last guy is Jarek Reed, and this guy is probably going to start the season on IR, and for all we know, he never actually gets out there. If he does, I have to believe it'll be in garbage time. There are options behind Love and Jenkins that are clearly ahead of Jarek Reed II, and that's not a disrespect to Jarek Reed, but he's coming off a major injury, and I wouldn't expect him to actually play meaningful snaps this year. Even in a worst case scenario, there are guys that we can move from corner. There are guys we can call up off the practice squad. There are guys we can get in free agency. So just, let's say some garbage time. 7 tackles. And I think I went with basically 0s across the board otherwise because he just shouldn't really be playing that much at all. Maybe he shouldn't play at all. I don't have him giving up any completions. I think that some of his tackles are probably going to come on special teams as well because he is a good special team player, more than anything going on with his involvement on defense. That's everything. All right, that's your safeties. So tell me down below, what do you think? I know that box score stuff with safeties is really rough because it only tells a small part of the picture, but I think this does kind of at least sketch it out a little bit to where you can look at these numbers and say, okay, I think I understand what these players are going to be worth in terms of value to the Seahawks based off these stats. Like, Love and Jenkins will be okay. We won't be excited about having them around next year necessarily, but we won't be unhappy about it either. I just feel like that there's other things going on this defense that should make these guys not stand out in a negative way, even though the talent level is clearly not where it is with some of the other positions, like defensive line and edge rusher. All right, so that's what I got. I'll see you guys later. Go Hawks. Couple more videos like this over the next couple days, and then we're basically there. We are basically at the training camp. We are basically at the action point of the offseason. Go Hawks.